Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. My name is Edward Taylor, and this happened to me back in 1998. I was a junior counselor at Camp Willow Creek, a summer camp nestled deep in the forests of northern Minnesota. I had grown up attending this camp and had always considered it my second home. I loved everything about it: the pristine lake, the weathered canoes, the crackling campfire stories. But that summer, something happened that changed everything. I was 20 years old, full of energy and optimism. I had just finished my sophomore year at college, majoring in biology. The familiar scent of pine needles and wood smoke filled my nostrils as I stepped off the bus at Camp Willow Creek. The June sun filtered through the canopy of trees, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. As I shouldered my backpack and made my way to the counselor's cabin, I couldn't help but grin. This place held so many memories: summers spent swimming in the cool lake waters, nights gazing up at stars brighter than I'd ever seen in the city, friendships forged over marshmallows and ghost stories. But there was one friendship that stood out above all others. As if on cue, I heard a familiar voice call out, "Eddie, over here, man." I turned to see Max and Tillman jogging towards me, a wide smile on his face. Max and I had been best friends since our first summer at camp when we were just 8 years old. We were inseparable, always getting into trouble and pulling pranks on each other. Now at 21, Max was the head counselor, but he still had that mischievous glint in his eye. "Max, good to see you, buddy," I said, clasping his hand and pulling him into a quick hug. "How's it feel being the big boss this year?" Max rolled his eyes. "About as fun as poison ivy. Come on, I'll help you get settled in. We've got orientation in an hour." As we walked, Max filled me in on the changes since last summer. Camp Willow Creek was a traditional camp with rustic cabins, a central mess hall, and a sprawling lake perfect for swimming and boating. The camp was divided into 2 sections, one for the younger kids aged 8, 12, and one for the older teens 13, 16. Each group had their own activities, but we all came together for meals and evening campfires. "We've got a good group this year," Max said as we approached the counselor's cabin. "A lot of returning campers, some new faces. Should be a great summer." I nodded, breathing in the familiar scent of wood and pine. "Just like old times, huh?" Max's smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly I almost missed it. "Yeah," he said, his voice oddly quiet. "Just like old times." Before I could ask what was wrong, he clapped me on the shoulder and gestured to the cabin. "Come on, let's get you unpacked. You're bunking with me and a couple of the other junior counselors." As I followed Max into the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just his momentary change in demeanor. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to pre-camp jitters. Little did I know that uneasy feeling was just the beginning of a summer that would change my life forever. We spent the next hour unpacking and catching up. Max introduced me to the other junior counselors: Tyler, a lanky redhead with a quick wit, and Jess, a quiet girl with kind eyes and a shy smile. As we made our way to the main lodge for orientation, I found myself falling easily back into the rhythms of camp life. Mrs. Harper, the camp director, was waiting for us in the lodge. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been running the camp for as long as I could remember. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her sharp eyes scanned the group of counselors as we filed in. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "For those of you returning, it's good to have you back. For our new counselors, welcome to Camp Willow Creek. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started." As Mrs. Harper went through the camp rules, safety procedures, and activity schedules, I found my mind wandering. My gaze drifted to the large windows overlooking the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. But as I watched, a ripple disturbed the surface, spreading outward in concentric circles. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something break the surface, something large. I blinked, and the lake was calm again. Must have been a fish, I thought, turning my attention back to Mrs. Harper. but the uneasy feeling from earlier returned, settling in the pit of my stomach like a cold, heavy stone. As the orientation wrapped up, Mrs. Harper called Max and me aside. "Edward Maxon, a word, please." We approached her, exchanging curious glances. Mrs. Harper's expression was grave as she spoke in a low voice. "I'm glad you two are working together this summer. We've had some concerns lately. I need you both to keep an extra close eye on things." "Concerns?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "What kind of concerns?" Mrs. Harper hesitated, her eyes darting between us. "Just some strange occurrences. Probably nothing, but we can't be too careful. If you notice anything out of the ordinary, anything at all, I want you to report it to me immediately. Understood?" We nodded, a bit bewildered. As we left the lodge, I turned to Max. "What was that about? Have there been problems at the camp?" Max ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his discomfort. "It's probably nothing," he said, but his tone wasn't convincing. "Just some weird stuff. Animals acting strange, noises in the woods at night. You know how stories can get blown out of proportion?" I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Max wasn't telling me everything. As we made our way to the campfire to meet the arriving campers, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. The woods seemed to press in closer, the cheerful sounds of the camp fading as we walked. For a moment I could have sworn I heard something, a low guttural sound coming from the trees. I stopped, turning to look into the gathering darkness. "You okay, Eddie?" Max asked, pausing beside me. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Yeah, just thought I heard something. Must be imagining things." Max clapped me on the shoulder, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come on, we've got campers to welcome. It's going to be a great summer, you'll see." As we continued towards the campfire, the excited voices of arriving campers drifted towards us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the woods. Something that didn't belong at Camp Willow Creek. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a summer that would test our friendship, our courage, and our very sanity. The darkness lurking in the woods was about to make itself known, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first week of camp passed in a blur of activity. Days were filled with the excited shouts of children playing capture the flag, the splash of canoes hitting the water, and the twang of arrows finding their marks at the archery range. Nights brought campfires, s'mores, and the time-honored tradition of trying to scare each other with ghost stories. But beneath the familiar routines, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was in the little things, a sudden hush falling over the woods, the way the younger campers would sometimes stop and stare into the trees, a look of confusion or fear on their faces. More than once I caught Max having hushed conversations with Mrs. Harper, their expressions serious and worried. It was on the 8th night of camp that things took a turn. I was on night patrol, making my rounds of the cabins to ensure all the campers were in bed. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver light over the camp. As I approached the edge of the camp where the woods began, I heard a twig snap. I froze, my flashlight beam sweeping across the underbrush. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, I heard it. A low, guttural growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard in these woods. I took a step back, my heart pounding. The beam of my flashlight caught a pair of eyes reflecting in the darkness, eyes that were too high off the ground to belong to any normal forest creature. They blinked once and then were gone. I ran back to the counselor's cabin, bursting through the door and startling Max awake. "Eddie, what's wrong?" he asked, sitting up in his bunk. I told him what I'd seen, my words tumbling out in a rush. To my surprise, Max didn't look skeptical. Instead, his face paled. "You're sure about what you saw?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "Max, what's going on? This isn't the first weird thing that's happened, is it?" Max sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, it's not. Come on. There's something I need to show you." He led me to the camp office, using his master key to let us in. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "I found this in the old storage shed at the edge of camp," he explained, handing it to me. "It's a journal from a counselor named Walter who worked here in the 70s. You need to read it, Eddie. I think I think whatever's out there in the woods, it's been here for a long time. I opened the journal with trembling hands. The entries started out normal enough. Daily logs of camp activities, funny anecdotes about the campers. But as I read on, the tone changed. Walter wrote about strange occurrences at the camp. Shadows moving in the forest at night, eerie sounds coming from the lake, campers going missing. One entry in particular made my blood run cold. Dated July 12, 1973, it detailed the disappearance of a camper named Eddie. Walter described a frantic search that turned up nothing. Eddie had vanished without a trace. I looked up at Max, my mind reeling. Is this real? Did a kid really disappear? Max nodded grimly. My older brother was at camp that summer. He told me about it once, said it was the scariest thing he'd ever experienced. The official story was that Eddie got lost in the woods, but they never found him. I sat back trying to process what I was reading. So you think whatever I saw in the woods tonight, it's connected to this? I don't know, Max admitted, but I think we need to find out. Something's not right here, Eddie. I can feel it. As if to punctuate his words, a long, mournful howl echoed from the woods, causing us both to jump. It didn't sound like a wolf or any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded wrong. We spent the rest of the night poring over the journal, piecing together Walter's increasingly frantic entries. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, we had come to a chilling conclusion. Something had been haunting Camp Willow Creek for decades, something that didn't belong in our world. As we made our way back to the cabin, the camp beginning to stir with the early risers, Max turned to me. We need to be careful, Eddie. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. We can't let the campers know something's wrong. It would cause a panic. But we need to figure out what's going on. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. We were supposed to be keeping these kids safe, but how could we protect them from something we didn't understand? As we approached the cabin, a scream split the morning air. We broke into a run, our conversation forgotten. Whatever was lurking in the woods of Camp Willow Creek, it was making its presence known, and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The scream, we quickly discovered, had come from Tessa, one of the junior counselors assigned to the girls' cabins. We found her outside Cabin 5, her face pale and her hands shaking. Tessa, what happened? Max asked, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. She looked at us with wide, frightened eyes. I saw someone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A man, standing right outside the cabin. He was just staring at me. What did he look like? I asked, scanning the area around the cabin. There was no sign of anyone now. Tessa shook her head. I don't know, it was dark, but he looked wrong somehow, like he didn't belong here. Max and I exchanged a glance. Her description was unsettlingly similar to what I had seen in the woods the night before. Did you see where he went? Max pressed gently. No, I blinked and he was just gone. Zero. We spent the next hour searching the area around the cabin and questioning the other counselors and campers, but no one else had seen anything unusual. By the time breakfast rolled around, we had no choice but to try and carry on with the day's activities as normal. But normal was becoming an increasingly foreign concept at Camp Willow Creek. Over the next few days, more reports trickled in. Campers complained of hearing strange noises at night, of seeing shadows move in ways shadows shouldn't. One of the youngest boys swore he saw a monster down by the lake, but the other counselors dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Max and I knew better. We spent our free time combing through Walter's journal, trying to find any clues that might help us understand what we were dealing with. The more we read, the more convinced we became that the disappearance of Eddie in 1973 was somehow connected to the current events. Look at this, Max said one night, pointing to an entry in the journal. Walter mentions a clearing in the woods where he saw strange lights. He thought it might be connected to Eddie's disappearance. I leaned over to read the entry. Walter described a small clearing about a mile north of the camp, where he had seen unexplained lights and heard odd noises. We should check it out, I said, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. Max nodded. Tomorrow night. We'll wait until after lights out. The next day dragged by, each minute feeling like an hour. I went through the motions of leading activities and keeping the campers entertained, but my mind was on the coming night and what we might discover. Finally, after the last camper had been tucked into bed and the other counselors had settled in for the night, Max and I slipped out of the cabin. The moon was hidden behind clouds, leaving the forest in near total darkness. We clicked on our flashlights and headed north, using Walter's descriptions in the journal to guide us. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No chirping of crickets, no hooting of owls. Just the crunch of leaves under our feet and the sound of our own breathing. After about 20 minutes of walking, we came to a small clearing. "This must be it," Max whispered, sweeping his flashlight around the area. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the clearing, but as we searched, I noticed something glinting in the dirt. I knelt down and brushed away the leaves, revealing a small silver pendant. "Max, look at this," I called softly. He came over and examined the pendant. It was tarnished and dirty, but we could make out an engraving on one side. E.M. "E.M.," Max repeated. "Eddie Mullen?" A chill ran down my spine. "You think this belonged to the kid who disappeared?" Before Max could answer, a twig snapped in the woods behind us. We whirled around, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, tall, unnaturally thin, with eyes that reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows with inhuman speed. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my heart pounding. Max nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "We need to get back to camp, now." We ran, crashing through the underbrush, the feeling of being watched, pressing in on us from all sides. By the time we made it back to the safety of the camp, we were both out of breath and shaken. We ducked into the counselor's cabin, careful not to wake the others, and collapsed onto Max's bunk. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my heart still racing. Max shook his head, his eyes wide. "I don't know, but I've never seen anything move that fast." We sat in silence for a moment, trying to process what we just experienced. The pendant felt heavy in my pocket, a tangible link to a decades-old mystery. "We need to talk to Mrs. Harper," Max said finally. "She needs to know what's going on." I nodded in agreement. As scared as I was, I knew we couldn't keep this to ourselves any longer. Whatever was out there in the woods, it was a threat to everyone at Camp Willow Creek. The next morning, we went to Mrs. Harper's office as soon as we could slip away from our duties. Her face grew increasingly grave as we recounted our experiences and showed her the pendant. When we finished, she sat back in her chair with a heavy sigh. "I was afraid of this," she said softly. Max and I exchanged a confused look. "You knew about this?" I asked. Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. "Not everything, but enough. The disappearance of Eddie Mullen has been a shadow over this camp for decades. There have always been rumors, stories about something in the woods, but nothing concrete, nothing we could act on." "Until now," Max said. "Until now," Mrs. Harper agreed. She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Boys, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. If word gets out about what's happening, it could mean the end of Camp Willow Creek, but more importantly, it could put the campers in danger." "So what do we do?" I asked. Mrs. Harper was quiet for a moment, considering. "For now, we keep this between us. Double the night patrols, keep a closer eye on the campers, and continue your investigation. If there's any chance of getting to the bottom of this, we need to take it." We left Mrs. Harper's office with a newfound sense of purpose, but also a weight of responsibility. We were no longer just camp counselors. We were the only line of defense between the campers and whatever was lurking in the woods. Over the next few days, Max and I threw ourselves into our investigation. We pored over old camp records, looking for any other incidents that might be connected to Eddie's disappearance. We interviewed longtime staff members, carefully probing for any unusual experiences they might have had. But our most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One evening, as I was helping clean up after dinner, I overheard two of the older campers talking in hushed tones. "I'm telling you, I saw it," one of them, a boy named Kyle, was saying. "Down by the old boathouse, it was like a person, but not. Too tall, too thin, and its eyes—" I casually moved closer, pretending to wipe down a nearby table. "You're full of it," his friend scoffed. "You're just trying to scare me. Kyle shook his head vehemently. I'm serious, and that's not all. I found something there, something weird. My ears perked up at this. Hey guys, I said, approaching their table. Couldn't help overhearing. What did you find, Kyle? Kyle looked up at me, a mix of fear and excitement in his eyes. Promise you won't laugh? I nodded solemnly. I promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out for me to see. It was another pendant, almost identical to the one Max and I had found in the clearing. My blood ran cold. Where exactly did you find this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. By the old boathouse, Kyle repeated. It was half buried in the sand. I thought it looked cool, so I took it. I thanked Kyle, telling him I'd keep the pendant safe, and hurried to find Max. As I filled him in on what I'd learned, his face grew increasingly pale. The old boathouse, he muttered. Of course. How did we not think of that before? The old boathouse was on the far side of the lake, rarely used these days except for storage. It had always had a reputation for being creepy, a favorite spot for older campers to tell ghost stories. We need to check it out, I said. Max nodded grimly. Tonight, after lights out. As we made our plans, I couldn't shake a feeling of dread. We were getting closer to answers, but at what cost? The creature in the woods was no longer just a shadow in the corner of our eyes. It was real, it was dangerous, and it was watching us. Little did we know our midnight expedition to the old boathouse would lead us to horrors beyond our darkest nightmares and change the course of our lives forever. The night was unusually still as Max and I made our way around the edge of the lake towards the old boathouse. The water was like glass, reflecting the starry sky above. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful, but tonight the silence felt oppressive, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. We moved as quietly as we could, our flashlights off to avoid drawing attention. The old boathouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. As we got closer, I could make out the peeling paint, the sagging roof. It looked even more dilapidated than I remembered. Ready? Max whispered as we reached the door. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. Max tried the handle. Locked, of course. He pulled out the master key Mrs. Harper had given us, and after a moment of fumbling, the lock clicked open. The door creaked as we pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. We stepped inside, clicking on our flashlights. The beam revealed dusty old canoes stacked against the walls, cobwebs in every corner. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rotting wood. Let's split up, Max suggested. We'll cover more ground that way. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of separating, but I had to admit it made sense. We each took a side of the boathouse, carefully examining every nook and cranny. At first I didn't find anything out of the ordinary, just decades worth of forgotten camp equipment. But as I moved towards the back of the building, something caught my eye. There, half hidden behind an old life jacket, was a small door I'd never noticed before. Max, I called softly, come look at this. He made his way over, his eyebrows raising as he saw the door. Where does that lead? I shrugged. Only one way to find out. The door was stuck, swollen with age and damp. It took both of us pushing with all our might to force it open. Beyond was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. We shared a look, both thinking the same thing. This shouldn't exist. The boathouse was built on the shore of the lake. There shouldn't be anything underneath it. We have to check it out, Max said, voicing what we were both thinking. I nodded, trying to swallow past the lump in my throat. You first. Max started down the stairs, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the way. I followed close behind, my skin crawling with each step we took. The air grew colder as we descended, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs was another door. This one opened easily, revealing a small, circular room, and what we saw inside made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved directly into the wood. They looked ancient, like nothing I'd ever seen before. In the center of the room was a large stone slab, its surface stained dark with what I prayed wasn't blood. But it was what was on the walls that truly horrified me. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned up in a macabre collage. And in every photo was a child, smiling, laughing, unaware of the fate that awaited them. With a jolt of terror, I recognized some of them as current campers. "Max," I breathed, my voice shaking. "What is this place?" Before he could answer, we heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the stairs behind us. We whirled around, our flashlights illuminating a sight that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was the creature we'd glimpsed in the woods, but seeing it fully for the first time, I realized how inadequate our descriptions had been. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs long and distorted. Its skin was a patchwork of fur and scales, as if it couldn't decide what kind of creature it wanted to be. But it was the face that truly terrified me. A twisted parody of human features, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly hunger. For a moment we all stood frozen, Max and I in terror, the creature in what almost seemed like surprise. Then it let out a roar that shook dust from the ceiling and lunged towards us. "Run!" Max yelled, shoving me towards the stairs. We scrambled up the steps, the creature's howls echoing behind us. I could hear its claws scraping against the wood, far too close for comfort. We burst out of the boathouse and ran along the shore, not daring to look back. The camp was in sight when I heard Max cry out. I turned to see him stumble, his foot caught in a tangle of roots. The creature was upon him in an instant, its clawed hand reaching out. Without thinking, I grabbed a large branch from the ground and swung it with all my might. It connected with the creature's head with a sickening thud. The beast staggered back, shaking its head as if dazed. I helped Max to his feet, and we ran the last stretch to the camp, not stopping until we were safely inside the counselor's cabin. We slammed the door shut and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The reality of what we'd just experienced was too overwhelming, too terrifying to put into words. Finally, Max broke the silence. "We have to tell Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice hoarse. "We have to evacuate the camp. Now." I nodded, still too out of breath to speak. As the adrenaline began to fade, the true horror of what we'd discovered began to sink in. The room under the boathouse, the photographs. This wasn't just about Eddie Mullen anymore. Something evil had taken root at Camp Willow Creek, and it had been preying on children for who knows how long. As we made our way to Mrs. Harper's cabin, I couldn't shake the image of those photographs from my mind. How many children had fallen victim to this creature over the years? And more importantly, how were we going to stop it? Little did I know, our night of terror was far from over. The creature was out there, angry and hungry, and Camp Willow Creek was about to become a battleground. Mrs. Harper's face grew paler with each word as Max and I recounted our terrifying experience at the old boathouse. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, her eyes closed and her hands trembling slightly. "I had hoped, I had prayed this day would never come," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Max and I exchanged a confused look. "Mrs. Harper," I said cautiously, "what do you mean? Did you know about this?" She opened her eyes, and I was struck by the pain and guilt I saw there. "Not everything," she admitted, "but enough to know that I should have closed this camp years ago." Mrs. Harper stood up and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of her office. She unlocked it and pulled out a thick file folder, placing it on her desk in front of us. "This contains every strange occurrence, every unexplained disappearance that's happened at Camp Willow Creek over the past 50 years, she explained. "I've been collecting this information since I became director, trying to piece together the truth." Max leafed through the file, his eyes widening. "There's so many," he muttered. "How did no one notice?" "People did notice," Mrs. Harper said grimly, "but it was always explained away. A child wandered off into the woods, an animal attack, a tragic accident. No one wanted to believe there could be something more sinister at work." "But you suspected," I said. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Harper nodded. "I did, but I didn't want to believe it either. This camp, it's been my life's work. The thought that it might be responsible for—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "We need to evacuate," Max said firmly. "Get everyone out of here before that thing can hurt anyone else." Mrs. Harper nodded in agreement. "You're right. We'll call the parents first thing in the morning. Tell them there's been a gas leak or something. But tonight, we need to make sure everyone is safe. Double the night patrols, check on every cabin." As we left Mrs. Harper's office to wake the other counselors, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that we were missing something important. The creature, the room under the boathouse, the decades of disappearances. How did it all fit together? The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. We woke the other counselors, giving them a sanitized version of events, that we had reason to believe there was a dangerous animal in the area. They were skeptical at first, but the fear in our eyes must have convinced them we were serious. By dawn, the entire camp was on high alert. The younger campers were kept in their cabins, told there was a special indoor day planned. The older ones helped with patrols, excited by what they thought was a thrilling camp emergency drill. As the morning wore on and preparations for evacuation continued, Max and I found ourselves back at the old boathouse. In the light of day, it looked almost ordinary, just an old, dilapidated building. But we knew the horrors that lurked beneath. "We need to document everything," Max said, pulling out his camera. "No one's going to believe us without proof." I nodded in agreement, but as we approached the building, I noticed something odd. The door, which we had left open in our frantic escape the night before, was now closed. "Max," I said, grabbing his arm, "look." He saw it too, his body tensing. "Someone's been here." Cautiously, we approached the door. It swung open at our touch, unlocked. Inside, everything looked the same as it had the night before. The dusty canoes, the cobwebs. But when we reached the hidden door at the back, we found it slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I pulled it open. The narrow staircase yawned before us, seeming even more ominous in the daylight. We descended slowly, every creak of the stairs setting my nerves on edge. The room at the bottom was exactly as we had left it. The strange symbols on the walls, the stone slab in the center. But the photographs were gone. Every single one had been removed, leaving only small pinpricks in the wood to show where they had been. "Someone's covering their tracks," Max said, his voice tight with anger. I was about to agree when something caught my eye. There, in the corner of the room, was a small object I hadn't noticed the night before. I walked over and picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was a ring, old and tarnished, but the engraving on the inside was still legible. W.H. "W.H., I muttered. "Walter Harper." Max's eyes widened in recognition. Mrs. Harper's husband. He was a counselor here in the 70s, remember? The pieces began to fall into place in my mind, forming a picture too horrible to contemplate. Walter Harper, the author of the journal we had found, the one who had written about Eddie's disappearance, the one who had known something was wrong at Camp Willow Creek. "Max," I said, my voice shaking, "I think we've been looking at this all wrong. What if the creature isn't the only monster we're dealing with?" Before Max could respond, we heard a noise from upstairs, the creak of the boathouse door opening. We froze, listening intently, footsteps moving slowly across the floor above us. We looked at each other, the same thought passing between us. We were trapped. As the footsteps drew closer to the hidden door, I gripped the ring tightly in my hand. Whatever came down those stairs, we would face it together, and one way or another we would uncover the truth about Camp Willow Creek. The door at the top of the stairs began to open, and I held my breath, preparing for whatever horror was about to reveal itself. As the door creaked open, Max and I tensed, ready for anything. But what we saw wasn't the monstrous creature from the night before. It was Mrs. Harper. She descended the stairs slowly, her face a mask of resignation and sorrow. When she reached the bottom, she looked at us with tired eyes. "I suppose it was only a matter of time," she said softly. I held up the ring, my hand shaking slightly. "This belonged to your husband, didn't it? Walter Harper?" Mrs. Harper nodded, her eyes fixed on the ring. "Yes, Walter was. He was a good man, but he discovered something here, something terrible. It broke him." "The creature," Max said. "He knew about it?" "Not just knew about it," Mrs. Harper replied. He fed it." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I felt sick to my stomach as I began to understand the full scope of what had been happening at Camp Willow Creek. "The missing children," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All these years." Mrs. Harper's shoulders sagged. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Walter thought he could control it, use it somehow, but it grew stronger, hungrier, and when Walter wanted to stop, to tell someone, it wouldn't let him." "So you've known all along?" Max said, his voice tight with anger. "You've been covering it up." Mrs. Harper shook her head vehemently. "No, not at first. I didn't know the full truth until after Walter, after he was gone. By then it was too late. The creature had grown too powerful. It threatened to kill all the children if I didn't cooperate. I tried to process this information, my mind reeling. But the photographs, the room, why? Insurance, Mrs. Harper said bitterly. Its way of making sure I didn't try to stop it. One child every few years, that was the bargain. In exchange, it wouldn't take them all. The horror of the situation was almost too much to bear. Years of children disappearing, families devastated, all to feed some monstrous entity that lurked in the woods. "We have to stop it," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "We have to end this once and for all." Mrs. Harper looked at me with a mix of admiration and pity. "How? It's too powerful, too ancient. We can't fight it." But Max was nodding, a look of determination on his face. "Maybe we can't fight it directly, but we can expose it. We can make sure no one ever comes to this camp again." As we discussed our plan, a low rumble shook the room. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the strange symbols on the walls seemed to writhe. "It knows," Mrs. Harper whispered, her face pale with fear. "It's coming." We raced up the stairs and out of the boathouse, the ground trembling beneath our feet. In the distance we could hear screams coming from the direction of the camp. "The evacuation," Max said. "We need to make sure everyone gets out safely." As we ran towards the camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The creature was angry, its carefully maintained feeding ground threatened, and I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't going to go down without a fight. The chaos that greeted us at the camp was beyond anything I could have imagined. Counselors were herding terrified children onto buses, while others ran back and forth, trying to account for everyone. And at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the growing darkness, was a shape that defied description. The creature had emerged from its lair, and it was hungry. As we approached the frantic scene, I realized that our plan to expose the truth might have to wait. Right now, our priority had to be getting everyone to safety. But even as we joined the efforts to evacuate the camp, I knew that this was far from over. The final confrontation with the monster of Camp Willow Creek was coming, and the outcome would determine not just our fate, but the fate of every child who might ever set foot in these woods. The thought filled me with a mixture of terror and determination. Whatever happened next, we had to end this nightmare once and for all. The evacuation was chaos. Children were crying, counselors were shouting instructions, and through it all, the inhuman roars of the creature echoed from the woods. Max and I split up, each taking a section of the camp to make sure no one was left behind. As I ran from cabin to cabin, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. The creature was out there, and it was angry. I had just finished checking the last cabin in my section when I heard a scream. It was coming from the direction of the lake. Without thinking, I sprinted towards the sound, praying I wasn't too late. As I burst through the tree line onto the beach, I saw her. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, was standing at the edge of the water, frozen in terror. And emerging from the lake, its grotesque form glistening in the moonlight, was the creature. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Over here!" The creature's head snapped towards me, its glowing eyes fixing on my face. For a moment it seemed torn between its easy prey and this new threat. I used that moment of hesitation to my advantage. "Run!" I yelled to the girl. "Run back to the camp!" She didn't need to be told twice. As soon as the creature's attention was diverted, she took off, her bare feet kicking up sand as she fled. Now it was just me and the monster. It moved with unnatural speed, crossing the beach in long, loping strides. I turned and ran back into the woods, my mind racing. I needed to lead it away from the camp, away from the children. But where? Then it hit me. The boathouse. If I could get it back there, maybe we could trap it somehow. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, getting closer with each passing second. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I saw it. The old boathouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the night sky. I put on a final burst of speed and threw myself through the door, slamming it shut behind me. For a moment there was silence, then a low growl from outside. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. "Edward," Max's voice called out. He was outside on the other side of the creature. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I shouted back, "but we need to end this now." As if in response to my words, the creature let out a roar that shook the entire building. The door splintered under its assault, and I knew it was only a matter of seconds before it broke through. I looked around frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a can of gasoline in the corner, probably used for the boat motors. An idea formed in my mind, desperate and dangerous. "Max," I yelled, "when I say now, open the door and run." I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed the gas can and began splashing its contents around the room, covering as much as I could. The fumes made my eyes water, but I didn't stop. The door was beginning to give way, the creature's claws tearing through the wood. I positioned myself by the hidden door that led to the underground room, the matchbook from my pocket clutched in my sweating hand. "Now, Max," I shouted. The main door burst open and the creature charged in. At the same moment I struck a match and tossed it onto the gasoline-soaked floor. The room erupted in flames. The creature howled, more in rage than pain, as fire engulfed its massive form. I dove through the hidden door, slamming it shut behind me. The heat was intense, even through the door. I could hear the creature thrashing above, its cries a mix of fury and agony. The whole building groaned, timbers cracking in the inferno. I ran down the stairs, praying the underground room would provide some protection from the fire. As I reached the bottom, I heard a deafening crash from above. The boathouse was collapsing. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I huddled in that strange, symbol-covered room, listening to the roar of the flames and the dying shrieks of the creature. Eventually, silence fell. Cautiously, I made my way back up the stairs. The hidden door was hot to the touch, but not unbearably so. I pushed it open and emerged into a scene of destruction. The boathouse was gone, reduced to smoldering rubble. And there, in the center of the devastation, lay the creature. Its body was charred beyond recognition, but I could see no sign of movement. It was over. "Edward," Max's voice called out. He appeared from the tree line, his face smudged with soot, but alive. "Thank God you're okay." As we stood there, watching the last flames flicker out, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. We had done it. We had defeated the monster of Camp Willow Creek. But as I looked at the destruction around us, I knew that the real work was just beginning. The truth had to come out. The families of all those missing children deserved to know what had happened. And we had to make sure that nothing like this could ever happen again. As the first light of dawn began to break over the trees, I turned to Max. "Let's go," I said. "We have a story to tell." The nightmare of Camp Willow Creek was over, but its legacy would live on. And I knew that I would carry the memory of this night with me for the rest of my life. The days following the destruction of the boathouse and the creature were a blur of police interviews, media scrutiny, and sleepless nights. Max and I told our story countless times, to detectives, FBI agents, and finally, to the families of the missing children. Mrs. Harper was arrested, charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and obstruction of justice. The full extent of her involvement was still being investigated, but it was clear that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The authorities combed through the ruins of the boathouse and the underground room, gathering evidence. They found bone fragments in the ashes, too many to count, each representing a life cut tragically short. DNA testing would eventually put names to some of these remains, bringing a measure of closure to families who had spent years wondering what had happened to their loved ones. As for Max and I, we were hailed as heroes by some and viewed with suspicion by others. Our story seemed too fantastical to be true, yet the evidence was undeniable. Something terrible had happened at Camp Willow Creek, something that defied rational explanation. Weeks turned into months, and slowly life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. But for me, things would never be the same. The memories of that night haunted my dreams, and I found myself jumping at shadows, always half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching me from the darkness. One crisp autumn day, about 6 months after the incident, I received a call from Max. He sounded excited, almost manic. "Eddie, you need to come see this," he said. I've been doing some research and I think it might not be over. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean not over? We killed it, Max. We saw it die. Just come, he insisted. Please, you need to see this for yourself. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. As I drove to his apartment, my mind raced with possibilities. What could Max have discovered? And more importantly, did I really want to know? When I arrived, Max's living room looked like a scene from a detective movie. Papers were strewn everywhere, photos and newspaper clippings pinned to the walls. In the center of it all stood Max, his eyes wild with a mixture of excitement and fear. Look at this, he said, thrusting a stack of papers into my hands. I've been tracking similar incidents across the country. Disappearances, sightings of strange creatures. It's not just Camp Willow Creek, Eddie. It's happening everywhere. As I flipped through the documents, my heart sank. The patterns were undeniable. Reports of missing children, unexplained animal attacks, sightings of creatures that matched the description of what we had faced. What are you saying, Max? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. He looked at me, his face grim. I'm saying that what we fought, it wasn't alone. There are more of them out there, and I think they might be waking up. The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. Our ordeal at Camp Willow Creek hadn't been the end of something. It had been the beginning. As I stood there, surrounded by evidence of a horror that stretched far beyond what we had imagined, I realized that our fight was far from over. The monster we had faced was just one of many, and somewhere out there, in the dark woods and forgotten places of the world, others were stirring. The nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning, and as I met Max's determined gaze, I knew that we would face it together. Whatever horrors awaited us, whatever darkness threatened to consume the world, we would stand against it. Because now we knew the truth, and with that knowledge came a responsibility we couldn't ignore. The battle for Camp Willow Creek was over. But the war had only just begun. My name is Paul Harris, and I am 69 years old. This is the story of something that happened to me back in 2003, when I was managing a large cattle ranch just outside of Kingman, Arizona. It's a tale that still sends shivers down my spine, even after all these years. Kingman isn't the kind of place you stumble upon by accident. It's tucked away in the northwestern corner of Arizona, surrounded by vast stretches of desert and rugged mountains. The town itself is small, with a population that barely scratches 20,000. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, for better or worse. I'd been managing the Sundown Ranch for about 5 years when the incidents began. The ranch was a sprawling operation covering thousands of acres of arid land. We ran several hundred head of cattle, mostly Herefords and Black Angus. It was hard work, but honest work. The kind that leaves you bone-tired at the end of the day, but with a sense of accomplishment that's hard to find anywhere else. That summer had been particularly brutal. The heat seemed to radiate from every surface, shimmering in waves above the cracked earth. The cattle were restless, constantly seeking shade and water. We'd lost a few to the heat, despite our best efforts. It was just part of ranching life in this unforgiving climate. I remember the day it all started as clear as if it were yesterday. It was a Friday evening in late July. The sun was finally sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. I was sitting on the porch of my small ranch house, a cold beer in hand, watching the light fade from the day. The first cool breeze in what felt like weeks was just starting to stir, bringing with it the scent of sage and dust. My phone rang, shattering the peaceful silence. It was Charlie, one of my most reliable ranch hands. Charlie was in his mid-30s, a local boy who'd been working the land since he was old enough to walk. He wasn't the type to get spooked easily, which is why the tremor in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Paul, you gotta come down to the east pasture," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "Something's not right with the cattle." I sighed, setting my beer down on the porch railing. "What's going on, Charlie? Disease outbreak?" "No, it's hard to explain. Just get down here, will you?" The urgency in his voice had me moving before I'd even ended the call. I grabbed my hat and keys, heading out to my old pickup truck. The engine sputtered to life, and I set off down the dusty road towards the east pasture. As I drove, my mind raced with possibilities. We'd had our share of problems over the years: disease, drought, the occasional mountain lion picking off a calf. But something in Charlie's voice told me this was different. There was fear there, raw and unfiltered. The east pasture was our largest, stretching for nearly a mile along the base of a rocky ridge. As I pulled up to the gate, I could see Charlie's truck parked near the fence line, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Charlie was standing by the fence, his face pale in the harsh light. I climbed out of my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. "All right, Charlie, what's got you so worked up?" He didn't say anything, just pointed to a spot in the field about 50 yards away. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from my truck and started walking, Charlie falling into step beside me. The beam of light swept across the dry grass, catching the reflective eyes of a few cattle as they watched us approach. And then I saw it. The sight made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat. 3 of our cattle lay dead on the ground, their bodies torn open as if by some monstrous force. The wounds were jagged and deep, exposing bone and organ. Blood had soaked into the parched earth, turning it into a dark, sticky mud. "Jesus," I muttered, fighting the urge to retch. "What the hell did this?" Charlie shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, boss. Never seen anything like it. Found 'em like this about an hour ago when I was doing my evening rounds." I'd seen animal attacks before: coyotes, mountain lions, even the occasional bear. But this was different. The wounds were too large, too violent. It looked like something had literally torn these animals apart with its bare hands. "Any signs of what did this?" I asked, sweeping the flashlight beam in a wide arc around us. "Nothing," Charlie replied. "No tracks, no fur, no nothing. It's like whatever did this just appeared out of thin air and then vanished." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. Something was very, very wrong here. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's move the rest of the herd to the north pasture for now. We'll get the vet out here in the morning to take a look at this." Charlie nodded, clearly relieved to have something to do. We spent the next hour herding the remaining cattle to safety, our eyes constantly scanning the darkness around us. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every rustle of wind through the grass a harbinger of some unseen monster. By the time we finished, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. We made our way back to our trucks in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. "Charlie," I said as he was about to climb into his vehicle, "not a word of this to anyone in town, you understand? Last thing we need is a panic. Let's see what the vet says before we do anything else." He nodded, his face grim in the dim light. "You got it, boss. But what do you think did this?" I shook my head. "I don't know, Charlie. I honestly don't know." As I drove back to my house, the image of those mangled cattle kept flashing through my mind. In all my years of ranching, I'd never seen anything like it. It was violent, savage in a way that went beyond simple predation. That night sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind conjuring up all sorts of nightmarish scenarios. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind outside my window, had me sitting bolt upright, my heart pounding. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The horrors that awaited us in the coming weeks would make this night seem like a pleasant dream in comparison. The beast of Kingman Ranch had made its first appearance, and it was hungry for more. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. The vet, Dr. Simmons, came out to examine the cattle carcasses. He was as baffled as we were. The wounds didn't match any known predator in the area, and the lack of tracks or other evidence only deepened the mystery. "I've been treating livestock in this county for 30 years, Dr. Simmons said, shaking his head as he peeled off his latex gloves. "Never seen anything like this. You sure it wasn't some kind of machinery accident?" I shook my head. "No machinery's been near that pasture in weeks. Besides, look at those claw marks. No machine did that." The vet nodded grimly. "Well, I'll send these tissue samples to the lab, see if they can tell us anything. In the meantime, I'd keep a close eye on your herd. Whatever did this might come back for more." His words proved prophetic. 3 nights later, it happened again. I was woken in the middle of the night by the sound of my phone ringing. It was Charlie again, his voice tight with fear. "It's back, Paul. 2 more dead in the north pasture." My blood ran cold. We'd moved the herd to the north pasture thinking it would be safer. It was closer to the ranch house, more open with less cover for predators. But whatever this thing was, it didn't seem to care about our precautions. I threw on my clothes and drove out to the pasture, my headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. Charlie was waiting for me, his face pale in the harsh glare of his truck's fog lights. The scene was sickeningly familiar. 2 cows lay dead, their bodies torn apart in the same brutal fashion as before. The ground around them was churned up, as if there had been a tremendous struggle. "I heard something," Charlie said as we approached the grisly scene. "A sound like, I don't know how to describe it. Like a growl, but deeper, louder, made my whole body shake." I swept my flashlight across the ground, looking for any sign of the attacker. And then I saw it. A single massive footprint pressed into a patch of soft earth. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Too big to be a mountain lion or a bear, with long, cruel-looking claw marks at the end of each toe. I felt my gorge rise as I stared at it, my mind struggling to comprehend what kind of creature could have left such a mark. "Charlie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "go back to your truck and get the camera. We need a record of this." He nodded and hurried off. I continued to examine the print, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. Whatever had done this was big, bigger than any predator that should be in this area. Charlie returned with the camera, and we carefully documented the print and the cattle carcasses. As the camera flash lit up the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The darkness beyond the reach of our lights seemed to press in on us, alive with malevolent intent. "What do we do now, boss?" Charlie asked as we finished up. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Now we call the sheriff. This is beyond us, Charlie. We need help." The call to Sheriff Tom Garrison went about as well as I expected. Tom was a good man, but he was also a practical one. The idea of some unknown predator terrorizing the ranch didn't sit well with his no-nonsense worldview. "Unknown predator?" He scoffed over the phone. "Paul, you've been out in the sun too long. It's probably just a big cat. Maybe a bear that's wandered down from the mountains." "Tom, I'm telling you, this is different," I insisted. "I've seen mountain lion kills, bear attacks. This isn't like that. And the footprint, you need to see it for yourself." He sighed, a long suffering sound that crackled over the line. All right, I'll come out first thing in the morning, but I'm telling you, it's probably nothing more than a coyote with delusions of grandeur." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that this was all just a simple case of a known predator acting unusually. But deep down I knew better. The violence of the attacks, the size of that footprint. This was something else entirely. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat on my porch, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, my rifle across my lap. Every snapping twig, every rustle of wind through the scrub brush had me on edge. I kept imagining I saw movement in the shadows, kept thinking I heard that deep, resonant growl Charlie had described. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. Whatever this thing was, it seemed to be a creature of the night. But even as I thought this, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. We were making assumptions based on normal predator behavior, but there was nothing normal about what was happening on my ranch. Sheriff Garrison arrived just after sunrise, his cruiser kicking up a cloud of dust as it made its way down the ranch road. He climbed out, adjusting his hat against the already intense morning sun. "All right, Paul," he said by way of greeting, "show me this mysterious predator of yours." I led him out to the north pasture, pointing out the cattle carcasses and the footprint. To his credit, Tom's skepticism faded as he took in the scene. He crouched down by the footprint, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "You're right, this ain't no mountain lion." "So what do we do?" I asked. Tom stood up, brushing the dust from his hands. "Well, first things first, we keep this quiet. Last thing we need is a panic in town. I'll make some calls, see if we can get a wildlife expert out here. In the meantime, you keep your people alert. No one goes out alone, especially at night. And if you see anything at all, you call me right away." I nodded, relieved that he was taking this seriously. But as I watched him drive away, that feeling of dread returned. Something told me that a wildlife expert wasn't going to be much help against whatever was stalking my ranch. The next week passed in a state of heightened tension. We doubled our patrols, always working in pairs. I invested in some trail cameras, setting them up around the perimeter of the ranch. Every night I found myself sitting on my porch, rifle in hand, straining my eyes against the darkness. But the attacks stopped. The trail cameras caught nothing but the usual desert wildlife: coyotes, jackrabbits, the occasional mule deer. As the days went by without incident, I could feel the tension start to ease. Maybe whatever it was had moved on. Maybe it had just been a freak occurrence. I should have known better. I should have remembered that in horror stories, it's always when you start to feel safe that the real terror begins. And make no mistake, what happened next was nothing short of a waking nightmare. It was a Friday night, almost 2 weeks after the last attack. I was reviewing the footage from the trail cameras, more out of habit than any real expectation of finding anything. The familiar images flickered across my computer screen: a coyote slinking past, an owl swooping low over the ground. And then I saw it. My blood turned to ice in my veins. There, in the grainy black and white footage, was a figure moving through the pasture. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, gangly limbs that seemed to bend in ways that no human joints should allow. It moved with a strange, fluid grace, like a predator perfectly adapted to its environment. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure turned, seeming to look directly at the camera. Its eyes glowed in the infrared light, 2 pinpricks of hellish brightness in a face that was mercifully obscured by shadow. The image lasted only a few seconds before the creature moved out of frame, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears, enough to shatter any lingering doubts about what we were dealing with. This wasn't a mountain lion or a bear or any other known predator. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist in our world of science and reason, something monstrous. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I had to call Sheriff Garrison. He needed to see this. Everyone needed to see this. But as my fingers hovered over the keypad, a sound froze me in place. A low, rumbling growl, so deep I felt it in my bones rather than heard it with my ears. It was coming from just outside my window. Slowly, fighting against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned towards the sound, and there, peering in through the glass with eyes that glowed with an unholy light, was the creature from the video. It saw me. It knew I had seen it. And now it was coming for me. The beast of Kingman Ranch was no longer content to prey on cattle. It had developed a taste for something else, and I was about to become its next meal. Time seemed to stand still as I locked eyes with the creature outside my window. Its gaze held an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. This was no mindless beast, but a predator with purpose. I could see my own terrified reflection in its glowing eyes, distorted and small. My body felt frozen, but my mind was racing. The rifle. I needed to get to my rifle. It was propped up against the wall near the front door, only a few steps away. But those few steps might as well have been miles with that thing watching me. One sudden move and it might crash through the window. Slowly, ever so slowly, I began to edge towards the rifle. The creature's eyes followed my movement, its massive head tilting slightly in what I could only interpret as curiosity. The growl had subsided, replaced by a low rumbling sound that was almost like breathing, if breathing could sound menacing. I was halfway to the rifle when it happened. A floorboard creaked under my foot, the sound impossibly loud in the tense silence. The creature's reaction was immediate and terrifying. It reared back from the window, letting out a roar that shook the entire house. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before, part animal, part something else entirely. It was the sound of nightmares made real. I lunged for the rifle, my paralysis finally broken. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab it, but adrenaline took over. I spun around, raising the weapon just as the creature smashed through the window in an explosion of glass and splintered wood. Up close, it was even more terrifying than it had appeared on the grainy video. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body a twisted amalgamation of animal features. Matted fur covered most of its body, but in places I could see patches of scaly skin. Its face was a nightmare, elongated like a wolf's muzzle, but with rows of teeth that reminded me more of a shark. And those eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly light, filled with hunger and malice. I fired, the sound of the rifle deafening in the confined space of the room. The creature jerked back, a spray of dark blood erupting from its shoulder, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out another ear-splitting roar and lunged at me. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws barely missed me. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The rifle clattered across the floor, out of reach. The creature turned faster than something its size had any right to move. I scrambled backwards, my back hitting the wall. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But then, miraculously, headlights swept across the windows, the sound of a truck engine growing louder. The creature's head snapped towards the noise, its ears twitching. For a moment it seemed torn between finishing me off and fleeing from the approaching vehicle. Self-preservation won out. With one last baleful glare at me, it turned and leaped back through the shattered window. By the time I managed to get to my feet and stumbled to the window, it had vanished into the night. Moments later, Charlie's truck skidded to a stop in front of the house. He leaped out, a shotgun in his hands, his eyes wide with fear. "Paul," he shouted. "Paul, are you okay? I heard shots." I sagged against the wall, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush. "I'm here, Charlie," I called out weakly. "I'm okay, but it was here, the creature. It was right here." Charlie rushed inside, his face paling as he took in the destruction. The shattered window, the overturned furniture, the blood on the floor. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What happened?" I told him everything. The footage on the trail camera, the creature at the window, the attack. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in his eyes slowly turn to horror as he realized I was telling the truth. "We need to call the sheriff," he said when I finished. "Hell, we need to call the army. Whatever this thing is, it's not natural." I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "Yeah," I agreed. "But first, help me board up this window. I don't want that thing coming back while we're making phone calls." As we worked to secure the house, I couldn't shake the memory of those glowing eyes, that twisted face. I had looked into the face of true evil tonight, something that defied explanation or reason, and somehow I knew that this was far from over. The beast of Kingman Ranch had made its intentions clear. It wasn't just hunting for food anymore, it was hunting me. The news of the attack spread through Kingman like wildfire. Despite Sheriff Garrison's attempts to keep things quiet, it's hard to hide something like this in a small town, especially when that something leaves claw marks 8 feet up a ranch house wall. The town changed almost overnight. People who used to leave their doors unlocked now triple-checked them before bed. Parents kept their children close, eyeing the desert beyond the town limits with newfound wariness. The local hardware store quickly sold out of security cameras and motion sensor lights. A town meeting was called at the community center. I stood at the front of the room beside Sheriff Garrison, facing a sea of frightened and angry faces. The fear in the room was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog. "Now I know everyone's scared," Sheriff Garrison began, his voice steady despite the tension. "But we need to stay calm and rational about this. We're dealing with an unknown predator, yes, but panicking won't help anyone." A voice called out from the back of the room. "Unknown predator? That thing nearly killed Paul. We need to do something." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I could see the sheriff struggling to maintain control of the situation. "We are doing something," he insisted. "We've got wildlife experts coming in from the state capitol. We've increased patrols around the town perimeter. But what we need most right now is for everyone to stay vigilant and report anything unusual." The meeting went on for hours, with theories ranging from the plausible, an escaped exotic pet, to the absurd, government experiments gone wrong. Through it all, I sat quietly, the memory of those glowing eyes haunting me. I knew that no amount of increased patrols or wildlife experts was going to solve this. We were dealing with something beyond our understanding. As the meeting was breaking up, a man approached me. He was older, probably in his 80s, with a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime under the Arizona sun. I recognized him vaguely. Old Joe, they called him. He'd lived on the outskirts of town for as long as anyone could remember. "Mr. Harris," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I need to talk to you, privately." There was something in his eyes, a mix of fear and knowledge, that made me agree. We stepped outside into the cool night air, moving away from the dispersing crowd. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Old Joe asked without preamble. "The beast. You've looked into its eyes." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How did you know that?" He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Because I've seen it too, 50 years ago when I was about your age. It comes in cycles, you see. Every half-century or so it wakes up, hunts, feeds." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. What is it?" Old Joe shook his head. "I don't know. Nobody knows. The old-timers, the real old-timers, used to say it was some kind of spirit, a manifestation of the desert's hunger. I think it's something older than that, something that was here long before us and will be here long after we're gone." "How do we stop it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The old man's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. "We don't stop it, Mr. Harris. We survive it. We hunker down, we protect our own, and we pray it goes back to sleep before it takes too many of us." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary predator. This was something ancient, something evil, and it was just getting started. As I drove home that night, the desert stretched out around me, vast and unknowable. Somewhere out there, the creature was waiting, watching, hungry. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Old Joe's words echoed in my mind. "We don't stop it. We survive it." But as I pulled up to my darkened ranch house, the windows still boarded up from the attack, a different thought formed in my mind, a dangerous thought. Maybe, just maybe, we could do more than survive. Maybe we could fight back. Little did I know that decision would set in motion a chain of events that would push me to the very limits of sanity and survival. The beast of Kingman Ranch was about to meet its match, and God help us all. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Wildlife experts descended on the ranch, combing every inch of the property for signs of the creature. They set up more advanced camera traps, took plaster casts of the footprints, and collected samples of fur and saliva found at the attack sites. But I knew their efforts were in vain. This wasn't something that could be explained by science or tracked by conventional means. This was something else entirely. I threw myself into research, spending hours online and in the town's small library, looking for any information I could find on similar creatures or incidents. Most of what I found was clearly fiction or folklore, but here and there I started to see patterns, stories from different cultures and time periods that described something similar to what we were facing, a creature that came in cycles, that hungered for more than just flesh. One account in particular caught my attention. It was from a Spanish explorer's journal dated 1638. He wrote of an expedition into the Sonoran Desert where they encountered what he called El Devorador, the devourer. His description matched our creature almost exactly, right down to the glowing eyes and the otherworldly roar. The expedition had been all but wiped out, but the explorer claimed they had managed to drive the creature back using fire and blessed silver. It was a long shot, but it was more than we had before. I shared my findings with Sheriff Garrison and a small group of trusted townspeople. To my surprise, they didn't dismiss me outright. I suppose when you've seen claw marks 8 feet up a wall, you become a bit more open-minded about these things. "So what are you suggesting, Paul?" the sheriff asked, his face grim. "That we go monster hunting?" I nodded, feeling slightly ridiculous even as I said it. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. We know more about this thing now. We know its patterns, its weaknesses. We can't just sit around waiting for it to pick us off one by one." There was a long silence as everyone digested this. Then Charlie, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "I'm in," he said simply. "Whatever it takes to end this." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Even Sheriff Garrison, after a moment's hesitation, gave a resigned sigh. "All right," he said, "but we do this smart. We plan, we prepare, and we don't take any unnecessary risks. Understood?" We spent the next week preparing. Silver bullets were out of our reach, but we did manage to melt down some silver jewelry into crude arrowheads. We stockpiled flares and incendiary devices, anything that could create the fire that the Spanish explorer had mentioned. The plan was simple, in theory. We would lure the creature to a specific location on the ranch, a box canyon that had only one way in or out. There we would have the high ground and hopefully enough firepower to bring it down. The night of the hunt arrived clear and moonless. The darkness seemed to press in around us as we took our positions. I was on the canyon rim with Charlie and 2 others, each of us armed with rifles loaded with silver-tipped bullets. Sheriff Garrison and another group were at the canyon entrance, ready to seal it off once the creature entered. The bait was a live cow, tethered in the center of the canyon. Its nervous lowing echoed off the rock walls, setting my teeth on edge. Now all we could do was wait. Hours passed. The temperature dropped and a chill wind began to blow. Doubt started to creep in. What if it didn't come? What if all our preparations were for nothing? And then we heard it. That low, rumbling growl that I still heard in my nightmares. It was coming from the darkness beyond the canyon entrance. "Get ready," I whispered into my radio. "It's here." The seconds ticked by like hours, and then, suddenly, it was there. The creature bounded into the canyon with impossible speed, heading straight for the terrified cow. In the dim light of our electric lanterns, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was even more horrifying than I remembered. Its body was a mass of corded muscle and matted fur, with patches of scale-like skin visible in places. Its head was a nightmarish blend of wolf and something decidedly not wolf, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. And those eyes, they glowed with an unholy, hungry light. "Now!" I shouted, and we opened fire. The night erupted into chaos. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, creating a deafening cacophony. Flares lit up the sky, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The creature roared in pain and fury as our bullets found their mark. But it didn't go down. Instead, it turned its glowing eyes up towards us, a terrible intelligence shining in their depths, and then it began to climb. "It's coming up," Charlie yelled. "Fall back." We scrambled away from the edge, our hearts pounding. I could hear the scrape of claws on rock getting closer by the second. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were supposed to have the advantage up here. The creature's head appeared over the rim, its jaws open in a snarl of rage. I raised my rifle, knowing it was too late, that we were too close. This was it. We had failed. And then the world exploded in fire. Sheriff Garrison had shot a flare directly into the creature's face. It reared back with a shriek of pain, losing its grip on the canyon wall. For a moment it teetered on the edge. Then with a roar that seemed to shake the very earth, it fell back into the canyon. We rushed to the edge, weapons ready. The creature lay at the bottom of the canyon, unmoving. Was it dead? Had we actually done it? But even as hope began to rise in my chest, I saw movement. Slowly, impossibly, the creature began to stir. Its wounds were healing before our eyes, the bullets pushing themselves out of its flesh. "Dear God," Charlie whispered beside me, "what does it take to kill this thing?" As if in answer to his question, the creature's eyes snapped open. They found mine, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The beast of Kingman Ranch rose to its feet, shaking off our attack like a dog shakes off water. And then, with one last soul-chilling roar, it turned and bounded out of the canyon, disappearing into the night. We had thrown everything we had at it, and it hadn't been enough. The creature was still out there, and now it was angry. As I stared out into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just made things much, much worse. The failed hunt marked a turning point. Any hope we had of resolving this quickly and quietly evaporated like morning dew under the harsh Arizona sun. The creature, far from being deterred by our attack, seemed to have taken it as a challenge. The attacks increased in frequency and brutality. It wasn't just cattle anymore. Pets began to disappear from backyards. Then came the first human casualty. A night watchman at the edge of town, found torn to pieces in his guard shack. The town was gripped by terror. People barricaded themselves in their homes after dark. Those who could left town entirely. I couldn't shake the guilt. This escalation was my fault. I had pushed for the hunt, convinced that we could end this. Instead, I had only made things worse. The weight of that realization was almost unbearable. But there was no time for self-pity. We had to find a way to stop this thing before it destroyed everything and everyone in Kingman. I threw myself back into research with renewed desperation. There had to be something we were missing, some key to defeating this creature that we had overlooked. I pored over every scrap of folklore, every historical account I could find. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I had my breakthrough. I was reading an obscure text on Native American legends when I came across a story that made my blood run cold. The legend spoke of an ancient evil that had once roamed the desert, a creature of insatiable hunger that fed not just on flesh, but on fear itself. The more terror it caused, the stronger it became. The tribe had managed to bind the creature using a sacred ritual, trapping it in a deep sleep. But the ritual had to be renewed every 50 years, or the creature would awaken once more. My mind was racing. This matched everything we had seen, the cyclical nature of the attacks, the way the creature seemed to revel in the fear it caused. And if the legend was true, it meant that the creature wasn't just hunting for food. It was feeding on our terror, growing stronger with each passing day. I immediately called Sheriff Garrison, my voice shaking with excitement and fear as I explained what I had found. To his credit, he listened without interruption, even as I delved into what must have sounded like madness to him. "So you're saying," he said slowly when I had finished, "that this thing is some kind of ancient spirit that feeds on fear, and the only way to stop it is with a tribal ritual that hasn't been performed in God knows how long?" Put that way, it did sound insane, but I stood my ground. "I know how it sounds, Tom, but you've seen what this thing can do. You know it's not natural. What have we got to lose by trying?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the sheriff sighed. "All right, Paul, I trust you. What do you need?" The next day, we gathered a small group at the sheriff's office, myself, Sheriff Garrison, Charlie, and a few other trusted individuals. I laid out everything I had learned, explaining the nature of the creature and the ritual that might be able to stop it. "The problem is," I concluded, "the tribe that originally performed this ritual is long gone. We don't have the exact details of how it was done." "So what do we do?" Charlie asked, his face pale but determined. I took a deep breath. "We improvise. The legend mentions a few key elements, a sacred site, a specific chant, and a sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Sheriff Garrison's eyebrows shot up. "What kind of sacrifice are we talking about here?" "Not human, if that's what you're worried about," I assured him quickly. "The legend speaks of a pure animal willingly given. I think one of my cattle would suffice." The room was silent as everyone digested this information. It was a lot to take in, I knew. We were moving from the realm of a dangerous predator into something much more supernatural. But after everything we had seen, no one was arguing. "Okay," Sheriff Garrison said finally. "Assuming we're really doing this, where do we start?" "The sacred site," I said. "The legend mentions a place where the land and sky meet. I think I know where that might be." I described a unique formation on my ranch, a tall, flat-topped mesa that rose abruptly from the desert floor. From its summit you could see for miles in every direction. If anywhere in the area could be described as a place where land and sky meet, that was it. We spent the next few days preparing. I selected a young heifer for the sacrifice, one that was calm and easy to handle. Charlie and I practiced the chant I had found in the legend, our tongues stumbling over the unfamiliar words. The others gathered the supplies we would need for the ritual, herbs mentioned in the text, ceremonial items we cobbled together based on descriptions in the legend. All the while, the attacks continued. The creature seemed to be growing bolder, venturing closer to the center of town with each passing night. The fear in Kingman was palpable, a living thing that hung in the air like a thick fog. We were running out of time. Finally, the night of the ritual arrived. We made our way up the mesa in the gathering darkness. The sacrificial heifer led behind us. The air was still and heavy, as if the very desert was holding its breath in anticipation. As we reached the summit, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Somewhere out there in the darkness, I knew the creature was waiting, watching. Perhaps it even knew what we were attempting. We set up the ritual space according to the instructions in the legend, forming a circle of sacred herbs and placing ceremonial objects at specific points. The heifer was tethered in the center, surprisingly calm despite the tension that crackled in the air around us. As the moon rose, casting a pale light over the desert, we began the chant. Our voices rose and fell in an eerie cadence, the unfamiliar words echoing across the empty landscape. Minutes stretched into hours as we continued the ritual, our throats growing raw, our minds focused solely on the task at hand. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, we heard it, a roar of fury that shook the very ground beneath our feet. The creature had arrived. It bounded up the side of the mesa with impossible speed, its eyes glowing with malevolent fire. As it reached the summit, it paused, surveying the scene before it. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw something I had never seen in its gaze before. Fear. The creature knew what we were doing. It understood the threat we posed, and it was afraid. With a snarl of rage, it launched itself at us, claws extended, jaws open wide. But as it reached the edge of our ritual circle, something extraordinary happened. An invisible barrier flared to life, glowing with a soft blue light. The creature slammed into it with a howl of pain and fury, thrown back as if it had hit a solid wall. Our chanting reached a fever pitch. The air around us began to shimmer and distort, as if the very fabric of reality was being warped by our words. The creature hurled itself at the barrier again and again, each impact weaker than the last. As the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the mesa in golden light, the creature let out one final earth-shattering roar. And then, before our disbelieving eyes, it began to dissolve. Its form wavered and blurred, like a mirage in the desert heat. In moments it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a lingering echo of its final cry. We stood in stunned silence, scarcely daring to believe what we had just witnessed. Had we done it? Was it really over? As if in answer to our unspoken questions, a wind swept across the mesa, carrying with it a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The oppressive weight of fear that had hung over us for so long lifted, leaving behind a profound sense of relief. The beast of Kingman Ranch was gone. We had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but as I looked out over the sun-drenched desert, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that had taken root in my mind. The creature came in cycles. It slept, but it always woke again. We had won this battle, but the war might never truly be over. As we made our way back down the mesa, I silently vowed to be ready for the day, 50 years from now, when the beast of Kingman Ranch would stir once more. And when that day came, we would be waiting. The days following the ritual were surreal. The oppressive fear that had gripped Kingman for months slowly began to lift, like fog burning away under the morning sun. People emerged from their homes, blinking in the light as if waking from a long nightmare. The official story, concocted by Sheriff Garrison and myself, was that the predator had been tracked and killed by wildlife experts. It was a flimsy explanation that left many questions unanswered, but people seemed eager to accept it. I suppose after living through such terror, any explanation, no matter how inadequate, was preferable to the truth. For those of us who knew what had really happened, life would never be the same. We had glimpsed something beyond the veil of ordinary reality, something ancient and terrifying. That knowledge changed us in ways that were hard to articulate. Charlie threw himself into his work on the ranch with a newfound intensity. I think he was trying to lose himself in the mundane details of everyday life, to forget the horrors we had faced. Sheriff Garrison became more introspective, spending long hours staring out at the desert as if expecting the creature to reappear at any moment. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that our victory was only temporary. The creature was gone, yes, but for how long? The legend had spoken of a 50-year cycle. Would it return? And if it did, would we be ready? I began to prepare. I wrote down everything I could remember about the creature, the attacks, and the ritual that had banished it. I hid copies of these records in various locations around the ranch and in town. If I wasn't around when the creature returned, I wanted to make sure those who came after me would have the knowledge they needed to fight it. Life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. The cattle grazed peacefully in the fields where once they had been terrified. The long shadows of evening no longer held the same menace they once had. But every now and then I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear a sound in the night that made my heart race. The memories of those terrible months would not fade easily. Years passed. Kingman grew and changed. New people moved in, unaware of the terror that had once gripped the town. The old-timers who remembered would sometimes share stories over beers at the local bar, but even they began to doubt their memories as time went on. Had it really been as bad as they remembered? Surely not. But I remembered. Every night I would stand on my porch looking out over the darkened desert, watching, waiting, knowing that somewhere out there in the vast emptiness of the Arizona night, something was sleeping. And one day, it would wake up. As I grew older, I began to worry. What if I wasn't around when it returned? Who would stand against it then? I tried to pass on what I knew to the younger generation, but most dismissed my stories as the ramblings of an old man. Only a few listened, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. And so, as my 69th year approached, I found myself sitting down to write this account, a record of what happened in Kingman all those years ago, a warning for those who might face the beast in the future. To whoever reads this, know that the danger is real. The beast of Kingman Ranch is not gone, only sleeping, and when it wakes it will be hungry, hungry for flesh, hungry for fear. But know also that it can be defeated. We did it once. You can do it again. Stay vigilant, stay strong. And when the time comes, do not hesitate. For the safety of Kingman, for the safety of the world, you must be ready to face the darkness, because in the end that's all we can do. Face the darkness, fight back the monsters, and hope that when dawn comes, we're still standing. The beast of Kingman Ranch taught me that, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me to my grave. As I sit here, putting the finishing touches on this account, I can't help but reflect on how this experience has shaped my life. It's been over 2 decades since we banished the beast, but not a day goes by that I don't think about it. The ranch has prospered in the years since. The cattle are healthy, the land is productive. To an outsider, it might seem like nothing out of the ordinary ever happened here. But I know better. I see the scars that others miss, the claw marks high up on the old oak tree by the creek, the strange, twisted growth of grass in the spot where we performed the ritual. I've become something of a local legend myself, I suppose. The old man who talks about monsters and ancient rituals. Most people humor me with polite smiles and nods, but I can see the skepticism in their eyes. They don't believe. They can't believe. And perhaps that's for the best. Fear can be a terrible burden to bear. But there are a few who listen, a handful of young people in town who seem to sense the truth in my words. They come to me sometimes, asking questions, seeking knowledge. I tell them what I can, prepare them as best I'm able. They will be the first line of defense when the beast returns. If I'm no longer here to face it myself, I take comfort in knowing that they will stand in my place. As for me, I've made my peace with what happened. The terror, the sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, it all served a purpose. We protected our town, our people. We faced an ancient evil and emerged victorious. There's a certain pride in that, a sense of accomplishment that nothing else in my life has matched. But with that pride comes responsibility. The beast will return. Of that I have no doubt, and when it does, it will be stronger, angrier, more determined than ever to wreak havoc on our world. The next generation must be ready. They must be prepared to face the darkness, to stare into those glowing eyes without flinching. That's why I'm writing this account. It's not just a story, not just a record of past events. It's a guidebook, a warning, a call to arms. To whoever reads these words in the future, know that the danger is real. The beast of Kingman Ranch is not a legend, not a campfire story to scare children. It is a very real threat, and one day it will awaken once more. When that day comes, remember this. Fear is the beast's greatest weapon. It feeds on terror, grows stronger with each pounding heart and trembling hand. To defeat it, you must master your fear. Face it head on with courage and determination. The ritual we performed may work again, or you may need to find another way. But whatever method you use, remember that belief is key. Believe in yourselves, in your ability to overcome this evil. As for me, my time is growing short. I can feel it in my bones, in the way the desert wind seems to whisper secrets I can no longer quite hear. But I do not fear death. I've faced something far more terrifying than the simple end of life. And I've survived. My only regret is that I won't be here to stand against the beast when it returns, but I take comfort in knowing that I've done all I can to prepare the way for those who will take up the fight. My records are hidden away, waiting to be discovered when the time is right. My knowledge has been passed on to those willing to listen, and so, as I write these final words, I find myself filled with a strange mix of emotions. There's fear, yes, fear for what the future might hold, but there's also hope. Hope that when the beast returns, it will find not a town cowering in terror, but a people ready to stand against it, ready to fight, ready to win. To whoever reads this in the future, when the beast of Kingman Ranch stirs once more, know this: you are not alone. The strength of those who came before you stands with you. The courage that defeated the beast once can defeat it again. Be brave, be strong, and above all, do not give in to fear. For in the battle against the darkness, it is not the monsters we must overcome, but our own terror in the face of the unknown. The beast of Kingman Ranch may return, but so too will those who stand against it. And in that eternal struggle between light and dark, between courage and fear, I believe that humanity will always, eventually, prevail. This is Paul Harris, signing off. May God be with you all when the darkness comes again. My name is Kenneth White, and I am 80 years old. Back in 2015, I had an experience that turned my life upside down. Even now, years later, the memories of those events send shivers down my spine. I was just your regular guy, you know, born and raised in Denver, working as a mid-level manager at a tech firm, trying to make ends meet while balancing the demands of family and work. I had a wife, Jana, and a 7-year-old son, Tyler. Life was busy, but good. Then, one fateful summer, everything changed. I remember the day it all started like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday, I think. The company sent me to attend a tech conference in Sedona, Arizona. Beautiful place, right? Red rocks, blue skies, very picturesque. I wasn't complaining about the chance to get out of the office for a few days, but if I'd known what was waiting for me, I'd have begged off that trip in a heartbeat. The first day of the conference was pretty standard. You know, the usual schmoozing, handshakes, and trying to stay awake during endless PowerPoint presentations. My mind wandered during most of the talks, thinking about Jana and Tyler back home. I missed them, even though I'd only been gone a day. I found myself checking my phone more often than I should, hoping for a text or a missed call. As the day wore on, the stuffy conference room began to feel more and more claustrophobic. The air conditioning was working overtime, but it still felt too warm, too close. By the time the last session ended, I was ready for some fresh air and a stiff drink. That's when Bruce, a colleague from another branch of the company, convinced me to join him for a drink at a local bar. "Come on, Kenneth," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You can only take so much tech talk before you need a real break." I hesitated for a moment, thinking about calling Jana before dinner, but the thought of sitting alone in my hotel room staring at the walls was less than appealing. "All right," I agreed. "One drink." The bar Bruce chose was just a short walk from our hotel. It was dimly lit with a wooden interior that gave it a rustic charm. The smell of stale beer and fried food hit me as we walked in, and for a moment I second-guessed my decision. But Bruce was already making his way to a corner booth, so I followed. We ordered a couple of beers and settled in. Bruce was a good guy, always full of stories, and that night he was on a roll, talking about his latest hiking adventures. I found myself relaxing, the tension of the day slowly ebbing away as I listened to Bruce's animated descriptions of narrow trails and breathtaking vistas. I was just starting to enjoy myself when Bruce excused himself to use the restroom, leaving me alone with my drink. That's when I first noticed the man at the bar. He was older, probably in his 70s, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of a life lived outdoors. He wore a worn-out leather jacket despite the warm evening, and his eyes. There was something about his eyes that caught my attention. They seemed to glitter in the dim light of the bar, sharp and alert in a way that contrasted with his aged appearance. As I watched, he caught my eye and nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. I nodded back, trying to be polite but hoping he wouldn't take it as an invitation for conversation. I wasn't in the mood for small talk with strangers, but apparently the man had other ideas. He got up from his bar stool and walked over to my table, his movements slow and deliberate. There was a grace to his gait that belied his age, like a predator moving through tall grass. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I hesitated, caught off guard. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell him I was waiting for someone, but there was something in his manner, a quiet intensity that made me pause. "Sure," I said finally, gesturing to the empty seat across from me. He sat down, his movements fluid and controlled. Up close I could see the deep lines etched into his face, like a topographical map of a hard life. His eyes, I noticed, were a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to look right through me. "Name's Hank," he said, taking a sip from the glass he'd brought with him. The liquid inside was amber-colored whiskey, I guessed. "You here for the conference?" I nodded, wondering how he knew. "Yeah, just in town for a few days," I replied. "Name's Kenneth." Hank chuckled, a dry sound like leaves rustling. "Kenneth," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "Interesting name. You don't hear that every day?" I smiled, used to the reaction. Yeah, my parents had a thing for old-fashioned names. We made small talk for a while, but there was something about Hank that put me on edge. His eyes were intense, almost too intense, like he was sizing me up for something. I tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, the weather, the beautiful scenery around Sedona, but he kept bringing it back to me, asking probing questions about my job, my family, why I was in town. Finally, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There's this place," he said, "just outside town. Not many people know about it, but it's got a history. You should check it out if you get a chance." I nodded, not really interested, but wanting to be polite. "Sounds interesting," I said. "Maybe I'll do that." Just then, Bruce returned, and Hank excused himself, leaving us to our drinks. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though I couldn't put my finger on what. "Who was that?" Bruce asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just some local guy," I said, shrugging it off. But something about Hank's words stuck with me. An unknown place with a history. Despite my best efforts to forget about it, I found myself thinking about it more than I should have. As we finished our drinks and headed back to the hotel, I tried to push the encounter out of my mind. I had a conference to focus on, after all. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of my hotel room, Hank's words echoed in my head. Little did I know those words were the beginning of a journey that would change my life forever. A journey into darkness, into the hidden corners of human nature, into a mystery that had lain dormant for decades. A journey that would test my sanity, my courage, and my very understanding of the world. As I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that the next day would be the start of the most terrifying experience of my life. The dark secret of Blevins Lodge was waiting for me, and it was hungry for fresh blood. The next day of the conference dragged on interminably. My mind wasn't on the presentations or the networking opportunities. Instead, I found myself constantly distracted, my thoughts drifting back to Hank and his cryptic words about a place with history. As the final session ended, I made a snap decision. Instead of joining my colleagues for dinner, I decided to take a drive. I had a rental car after all, and Sedona was known for its scenic routes. At least that's what I told myself. Deep down, I knew I was hoping to stumble across the place Hank had mentioned. I set out as the sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and deep orange. The beauty of the landscape was breathtaking, but I found myself unable to fully appreciate it. There was a tension building inside me, a sense of anticipation mixed with a growing unease. As I cruised down the road, enjoying the stunning rock formations, I found myself heading towards the outskirts of town. The paved road gave way to gravel and then to a rough dirt track. The rental car's suspension creaked in protest as I navigated the uneven terrain. Just as I was beginning to think I should turn back, I saw it. An old, abandoned building loomed ahead, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. It looked like it had once been a lodge or a large cabin, now fallen into disrepair. The windows were dark, empty sockets staring out at the encroaching wilderness. My heart began to race. Was this the place Hank had talked about? I pulled the car to a stop and sat for a moment, debating whether to investigate further. The sensible part of me said to leave, to go back to the hotel and forget about this foolishness. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my feet sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The air was eerily still, not even a whisper of wind to rustle the leaves. As I approached the building, I could see that the front door was hanging off its hinges, revealing a yawning darkness inside. I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. What if I fell and hurt myself? No one knew where I was. I could lie here for days before anyone found me. But the pull of the unknown was too strong to resist. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking ominously under my weight. The interior was a mess of broken furniture, shattered glass, and graffiti-covered walls. Dust motes danced in the shafts of fading sunlight that penetrated the gloom. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to make out more details. There was a grand staircase leading to an upper floor, its once elegant banister now rotting and broken. To my right, a cavernous space that might have once been a dining room or communal area, and to my left, a smaller room that looked like it might have been an office. I made my way carefully towards the office, my footsteps echoing in the empty building. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the loud creak of rusty hinges. The office was in better shape than the rest of the building. There was an old desk, its surface thick with dust, and shelves lining the walls. But what caught my eye was an old photo album lying on the desk. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was heavy, the cover made of tooled leather that had cracked and faded with age. I opened it carefully, revealing black and white photos of people from what looked like the 1930s or 40s. The photos showed smiling people in old-fashioned clothes, standing in front of the very building I was in. In one, a group of men posed with hunting rifles and a large deer. In another, women in long dresses sat on the porch, glasses of lemonade in their hands. But as I flipped through the pages, the photos began to change. The smiles became forced, the eyes of the subjects holding a hint of fear. And in the background of some photos, I could swear I saw shadowy figures lurking at the edges of the frame. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Hank had been right. This place did have a history, and from the looks of it, not a pleasant one. I was about to close the album when I heard a noise. It was faint, like a whisper, but in the stillness of the abandoned building, it might as well have been a shout. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. There was no response, just the oppressive silence of the old lodge. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe an animal outside. But a creeping sense of unease had taken hold, and I decided it was time to leave. As I stepped outside, blinking in the fading daylight, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, and for a split second I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the woods watching me. But when I blinked, they were gone. I hurried back to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The dark windows of the lodge seemed to follow me, and I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in one of them as I looked in the rearview mirror. That night, back at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the abandoned building and the photo album. Something about it all felt off, like there was a story there that needed to be uncovered. The images from the album played on a loop in my mind, the forced smiles, the fearful eyes, the shadowy figures. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. What had happened at that lodge? Who were those people in the photos? And why did I feel like I had stumbled onto something dangerous? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to know more. I needed to uncover the truth about the abandoned lodge and its dark history. Little did I know, my curiosity was about to lead me down a path from which there might be no return. The dark secret of Blevins Lodge was stirring, awakened by my intrusion, and it was hungry for answers and for souls. The next morning I skipped the conference entirely. I couldn't focus on tech talks and networking when the mystery of the abandoned lodge consumed my thoughts. Instead, I headed to the local library, hoping to find some information about the building and its history. The library was a small, quaint building in the heart of Sedona. As I walked in, the smell of old books and the quiet hush of whispered conversations enveloped me. I approached the reference desk where an elderly librarian sat, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm looking for information about an old lodge just outside of town. I think it might have been called Blevins Lodge." The librarian, whose name tag read Mrs. Grafton, looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly behind her thick glasses. "Blevins Lodge, you say?" she repeated, her voice carrying a hint of, was that concern? I nodded, suddenly feeling like I had said something wrong. "Yes, I came across it yesterday. It's abandoned now, but I was curious about its history." Mrs. Grafton sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Blevins Lodge," she said, her voice lowering. "It was quite the place back in the day, but it's been abandoned for decades." "Do you know why it was abandoned?" I asked, eager for any information. She hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice even further. "There were incidents," she said, her eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "People went missing, strange occurrences. The place got a bad reputation, and eventually everyone left." My curiosity was piqued. "What kind of incidents?" I pressed. Mrs. Grafton shook her head. "I don't know all the details, but if you're really interested, you should talk to Old Man Tully. He was around back then, lives just outside town." She gave me directions to Tully's house, along with a warning to be careful. "Some stories," she said as I was leaving, "are better left untold." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove out to Tully's place. It was a ramshackle house at the end of a long, winding road, set back from the street and partially hidden by overgrown trees. As I pulled up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. For a long moment, there was silence. Then I heard shuffling footsteps, and the door creaked open. An elderly man with wild white hair and piercing blue eyes peered out at me. His face was a map of wrinkles, each line telling a story of a long and possibly difficult life. "You must be Kenneth," he said, surprising me. Mrs. Grafton called ahead, "Come in." I followed him inside, the smell of old books and pipe smoke filling my nostrils. The house was cluttered, every surface covered with books, newspapers, and what looked like old photographs. Tully led me to a sitting room, gesturing for me to take a seat in a worn armchair. "So," he said, lowering himself into a chair across from me with a groan, "Mrs. Grafton says you're asking about Blevins Lodge." I nodded, leaning forward. "I visited the building yesterday. I'm curious about its history." Tully's eyes narrowed, and he was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and grave. "That place has a dark history," he said. "Back in the 40s, it was a popular spot for hunters and vacationers, but then people started disappearing. One by one, they vanished without a trace." A chill ran down my spine. "Disappearing?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" Tully sighed, his gaze distant as if looking into the past. "It started with a young woman, a newlywed on her honeymoon. She went for a walk in the woods one morning and never came back. Her husband swore she'd only been gone for a few minutes, but when they searched, there was no trace of her." He paused, reaching for a pipe on the side table and lighting it. The sweet smell of tobacco filled the air as he puffed thoughtfully. "After that, it was like a curse had fallen on the place," he continued. "Every few months, someone else would vanish, a hunter, a child, an old man, always without a trace, always as if they'd just disappeared into thin air." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "What did the police say?" Tully shook his head. "They investigated, of course, but they never found anything. No bodies, no evidence of foul play. It was as if the woods around Blevins Lodge had simply swallowed those people up." "Do you believe that?" I asked, trying to keep my skepticism in check. "That the lodge was cursed?" Tully shrugged, blowing out a stream of smoke. "All I know is what I saw. Strange lights in the woods at night, eerie sounds that didn't belong to any animal I knew. And then one day my friend Jimmy went to the lodge and never came back." He fell silent, his eyes clouded with old grief. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. "After Jimmy disappeared," Tully continued finally, "I stayed away, but others didn't. The disappearances continued, and rumors started to spread. Some said it was a wild animal, a bear or mountain lion. Others whispered about darker things, cults, devil worship, things that go bump in the night." I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. What do you think happened? Tully fixed me with a steady gaze. I think there are forces in this world we don't understand, Mr. White. Things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. And I think Blevins Lodge attracted something hungry. A shiver ran through me at his words. But the disappearances stopped eventually, right? The lodge is abandoned now. Tully nodded slowly. They did. About 30 years ago, the owner of the lodge vanished. After that, no one would go near the place. It's been empty ever since. I thanked Tully for his time and left, my head spinning with questions. As I drove back to my hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something dark and dangerous. That night, I tossed and turned in my hotel bed, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the abandoned lodge, its dark windows like hungry mouths waiting to swallow the unwary. I thought about the people who had disappeared, about Jimmy who had gone to the lodge and never returned. And then I thought about the photo album I had found, the forced smiles, the fearful eyes, the shadowy figures lurking at the edges of the photos. What secrets did those pictures hold? As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made a decision. I had to go back to the lodge. I had to find out the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. Little did I know, my decision would plunge me into a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. The dark secret of Blevins Lodge was waiting for me, and it was hungry for a new victim. The next day I prepared myself for another visit to Blevins Lodge. I packed a backpack with supplies, flashlight, extra batteries, water, a first aid kit, and my camera. I also brought the hunting knife I'd packed for the trip, more out of a vague sense of needing protection than any real expectation of using it. As I drove out to the lodge, the beautiful Sedona landscape seemed to take on a more sinister aspect. The red rocks cast long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. The clear blue sky felt oppressive, as if it were pressing down on me. I arrived at the lodge just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the dilapidated building. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine, but I steeled myself and got out of the car. The lodge looked even more foreboding in the fading light. The broken windows seemed to watch me as I approached, and the hanging door creaked ominously in a breeze I couldn't feel. I took a deep breath, turned on my flashlight, and stepped inside. The beam of light cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spectral beings. I made my way carefully through the debris-strewn floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I headed straight for the office where I'd found the photo album. To my relief, it was still there on the desk, undisturbed. I picked it up, its weight feeling somehow more significant than before. As I opened it, a slip of paper fell out. I picked it up, shining my flashlight on it. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local man missing, foul play suspected." The article detailed the disappearance of a man named Robert Blevins, the owner of the lodge. According to the article, Blevins had last been seen entering the woods behind the lodge. Despite an extensive search, no trace of him was ever found. I frowned, remembering what Tully had told me about the owner vanishing. Was this the incident that had finally shut down the lodge? As I was pondering this, I heard a noise from upstairs, a creaking floorboard as if someone was walking around. My heart began to race. Was someone else here? "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the empty building. There was no response, just another creak. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I made my way to the grand staircase, testing each step carefully before putting my full weight on it. The wood groaned under my feet but held. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors on either side. Most were closed, but one at the far end stood slightly ajar. As I watched, it slowly began to open wider. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but curiosity and a strange, almost magnetic pull urged me forward. I approached the door slowly, my breathing loud in my ears. When I reached it, I paused for a moment, gathering my courage. Then, with a deep breath, I pushed it open. The room beyond was large, probably once a master suite. Tattered curtains fluttered at broken windows, and an old four-poster bed stood against one wall, its once fine linens now moldy and rotting. But what caught my eye was the far wall. It was covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pinned haphazardly to the decaying wallpaper. As I moved closer, I realized with a shock that I recognized some of the faces. They were the same people from the photo album downstairs, but these pictures were different. They showed the subjects in various states of terror, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams, and in each photo, lurking in the background, was a shadowy figure. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the horrifying display. What kind of sick mind would create something like this? Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, a low guttural growl that didn't sound human. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. It wore a tattered suit that might once have been elegant but was now little more than rags. But its most terrifying feature was its mouth. It was impossibly wide, stretching from ear to ear, filled with rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The creature, for I couldn't think of it as human, took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. In that moment I knew with certainty that I was face to face with the dark secret of Blevins Lodge. This was the thing responsible for the disappearances, the terror that had haunted this place for decades. And now it had found its next victim. Time seemed to stand still as I faced the nightmarish creature. Its hollow eyes bored into me, filled with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, so loud I was sure the creature could hear it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, with a speed that belied its jerky movements, the creature lunged at me. I reacted on pure instinct, diving to the side. I felt the rush of air as the creature's clawed hand swept through the space where I had been standing. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The creature let out a bone-chilling shriek of frustration and turned to face me again. Its impossibly wide mouth opened even further, revealing row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran. I burst out of the room and into the hallway, my feet pounding on the old wooden floor. Behind me I could hear the creature in pursuit, its movements accompanied by a terrible scrabbling sound, like nails on a chalkboard. I reached the stairs and practically flew down them, taking them two at a time. The old wood creaked and groaned under my weight, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought they might give way. But they held, and I found myself back on the ground floor. I could hear the creature coming down the stairs behind me, moving with an unnatural speed. I ran for the front door, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like lead. As I burst out of the lodge and into the cool night air, I realized with horror that I had left my car keys inside. They must have fallen out of my pocket during the chase. I had no time to go back for them. The creature was right behind me. With no other option, I ran into the woods surrounding the lodge. The trees loomed over me, their branches reaching out like grasping hands in the darkness. I could hear my pursuer crashing through the underbrush behind me, getting closer with each passing second. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs were on fire and my legs felt like they might give out at any moment. But fear kept me going, pushing me beyond my limits. Suddenly my foot caught on a root and I went sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the air driven from my lungs. For a moment I lay there, dazed and gasping for breath. Then I heard it, the sound of the creature approaching, its ragged breathing and the scratch of its claws against tree bark. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ankle and the blood trickling down my face from a cut on my forehead. I looked around wildly, trying to get my bearings. In the darkness, all the trees looked the same. I had no idea which direction I had come from or which way led back to civilization. The sound of the creature was getting closer. I picked a direction at random and started running again, each step sending a jolt of pain through my injured ankle. As I ran, the woods seemed to change around me. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little moonlight there was. The air grew colder and a mist began to rise from the ground, curling around my legs like ghostly fingers. I could no longer hear the creature behind me, but that didn't bring me any comfort. The silence was almost worse than the sound of pursuit. I felt like I was being watched from all sides, unseen eyes following my every move. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a light in the distance. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain and exhaustion, focusing only on that distant beacon. As I got closer, I realized it was a cabin. Smoke rose from its chimney and warm light spilled from its windows. I could have cried with relief. I stumbled up to the door and pounded on it with all my remaining strength. "Help!" I croaked, my voice hoarse from running. "Please, help me!" For a long moment there was no response. Then, just as despair was about to overtake me, I heard movement inside. The door opened and I found myself face to face with an old woman. She took one look at me, disheveled, bloody, and wild-eyed, and her eyes widened in understanding. Without a word, she grabbed my arm and pulled me inside, slamming the door behind me. As soon as I was inside, my legs gave out and I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the old woman's face, lined with worry and something that looked like recognition. When I woke up, I was lying on a comfortable couch, a warm blanket draped over me. The old woman was sitting nearby, watching me with keen eyes. "You've had quite a night," she said, her voice gravelly with age. "But you're safe now. That thing can't come here." I sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in my body. What was that thing?" I asked, my voice trembling. The old woman sighed heavily. "That, my dear, is a long and terrible story, one that goes back further than you can imagine. But you've stumbled into it now, and there's no going back. You need to know the truth about Blevins Lodge." As she began to speak, I felt a chill run down my spine. I was about to learn the true horror that lurked in the shadows of Sedona, a secret that had been buried for decades. And somehow, I knew that this knowledge would change my life forever. The dark secret of Blevins Lodge was about to be revealed, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I was about to hear. The old woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, settled into a worn armchair across from me. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharp intelligence and a deep sadness. "Blevins Lodge," she began, her voice low and serious, "was never just a hunting lodge. It was built on cursed ground, a place where the veil between our world and something else is thin." I listened, my mind reeling, as Margaret unfolded a tale that seemed too fantastic to be true. Yet after what I had seen and experienced, I found myself believing every word. According to Margaret, the land where Blevins Lodge stood had been sacred to the native people of the area for centuries. It was a place of power, where shamans would go to communicate with the spirit world. But it was also a dangerous place, a gateway that could be opened by those with the right knowledge or the wrong intentions. In the 1930s, Margaret continued, a man named Robert Blevins bought the land and built the lodge. He was a wealthy man, but he was also deeply involved in the occult. He believed he could use the power of the land to gain immortality. Margaret went on to explain that Blevins had performed dark rituals at the lodge, trying to open the gateway and harness its power. But he had underestimated the forces he was dealing with. "The gateway opened," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "But what came through was not what Blevins expected. It was a creature of unimaginable evil, a being that fed on fear and pain. The creature," Margaret explained, "was trapped at the lodge, bound by the very rituals Blevins had used to summon it. But it was cunning. It could take on the appearance of a normal man when it needed to, luring unsuspecting victims to the lodge." "The disappearances," I said, realization dawning. "That was the creature?" Margaret nodded grimly. "It needed to feed, and with each victim it grew stronger. Blevins realized too late what he had done. He tried to stop it, to close the gateway, but he disappeared," I finished for her. "Yes," Margaret said, "he became its final victim. After that, the lodge was abandoned, but the creature remained, trapped and hungry." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything Margaret had told me. It seemed impossible, like something out of a horror movie, and yet I had seen the creature with my own eyes. I had felt its malevolent presence. "But why now?" I asked finally. "Why is it active again after all these years?" Margaret's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of fear in them. "The binding is weakening," she said softly. "The rituals that kept it contained are losing their power, and now that you've encountered it, I'm afraid you've become a part of this. A chill ran down my spine at her words. What do you mean? The creature has sensed you, Margaret explained. It's tasted your fear. It won't stop until it has you. I felt my heart rate quicken, panic threatening to overwhelm me. What can I do? How can I stop it? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with resignation. There might be a way, she said, but it's dangerous. And once you start down this path, there's no turning back. She went on to explain that there was an ancient ritual, passed down through generations of her family, that could potentially close the gateway and banish the creature. But it required specific items, some of which were still in the lodge. You'll have to go back, Margaret said, her voice grim. You'll have to face the creature again. The thought made my blood run cold. The memory of those hollow eyes, that impossibly wide mouth filled with sharp teeth, was still fresh in my mind. The idea of deliberately returning to the lodge, of seeking out the creature, was terrifying. But as I sat there, I realized I didn't have a choice. If what Margaret said was true, the creature wouldn't stop coming for me. And if the binding was weakening, how long before it was able to leave the lodge entirely? How many more people would disappear? With a heavy heart, I nodded. Okay, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Tell me what I need to do. Margaret spent the next hour explaining the ritual in detail. I would need to gather certain items, a silver mirror, a book bound in human skin, and a dagger with a bone handle. All of these, she believed, were still somewhere in the lodge. Once you have the items, Margaret said, you'll need to perform the ritual at the very spot where Blevins opened the gateway. It's in the basement of the lodge. She gave me instructions on how to perform the ritual, making me repeat them back to her until she was satisfied I had them memorized. Remember, she said, her voice urgent, the creature will do everything it can to stop you. It will try to confuse you, to scare you. It might even try to trick you by appearing as someone you know. You must stay focused on the ritual no matter what happens. I nodded, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. When should I go? Tonight, Margaret said. At midnight. That's when the veil between worlds is thinnest. It's your best chance of succeeding. As I prepared to leave, gathering supplies and steeling my nerves, Margaret stopped me with a hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone her age. Kenneth, she said, her eyes boring into mine, I need you to understand something. This ritual, it's not without cost. Closing the gateway, banishing the creature, it requires a sacrifice. I felt my mouth go dry. What kind of sacrifice? Margaret's gaze didn't waver. A life, she said simply. Someone must stay behind to close the gateway from the other side. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. To stop the creature, to save who knows how many future victims, someone would have to sacrifice themselves. And given that I was the only one going into the lodge, I swallowed hard, my mind reeling. Was I prepared to make that kind of sacrifice? Could I willingly walk to my doom for the sake of strangers? But then I thought of the photos I had seen in the lodge, the terror on those faces. I thought of all the people who had disappeared over the years, of the families left behind to wonder and grieve, and I thought of what might happen if the creature ever managed to free itself completely. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. I understand, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'll do what needs to be done. Margaret's eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and respect. You're a brave man, Kenneth White, she said softly. May the spirits protect you. As I left Margaret's cabin and made my way back towards Blevins' lodge, the weight of what lay ahead settled over me like a shroud. In just a few short hours I would be facing an ancient evil, armed with nothing but a few mystical objects and a ritual I barely understood. And even if I succeeded, I would be paying the ultimate price. But as the lodge came into view, silhouetted against the night sky like a malevolent sentinel, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Whatever happened tonight, I knew I was doing the right thing. The dark secret of Blevins' lodge had claimed its last victim. It was time to end this, once and for all. Little did I know the true horror was yet to come. The final confrontation awaited, and it would test every ounce of courage and resolve I possessed. As midnight approached, I found myself standing once again before the looming facade of Blevins' lodge. The night was eerily still, no wind, no sounds of nocturnal animals. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. I clutched my backpack, filled with the items Margaret had given me, candles, herbs, and other components needed for the ritual. In my pocket, I felt the weight of the hunting knife, my only physical weapon against the horrors that awaited me inside. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the broken door and into the darkness beyond. The beam of my flashlight seemed feeble against the oppressive gloom, barely penetrating the shadows that seemed to writhe and twist at the edges of my vision. I made my way carefully through the debris-strewn lobby, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on edge. I knew I needed to find the items for the ritual, the silver mirror, the skin-bound book, and the bone-handled dagger, before I could proceed to the basement. As I searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned, I thought I caught glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. I found the mirror first, hanging crookedly on a wall in what must have been a bedroom. Its surface was tarnished and cloudy, but I could still make out my reflection, pale, scared, but determined. The book was next, hidden behind a loose panel in the library. The feel of it in my hands made my skin crawl, knowing what its cover was made of. I tried not to think about who it might have once been. The dagger proved more elusive. I searched room after room, growing more tense with each passing minute. I knew the creature was out there, watching, waiting. Why wasn't it attacking? The anticipation was almost worse than a direct confrontation. Finally, in what looked like it had once been an office, I found the dagger. It was in a locked drawer, which I had to break open. The handle was yellowed with age, intricate carvings spiraling along its length. As my fingers closed around the hilt, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, guttural growl coming from right behind me. I spun around, the dagger raised defensively. There, in the doorway, stood the creature. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Its fingers ended in long, sharp claws that clicked against the doorframe as it moved. And its face was the stuff of nightmares. Hollow black eyes stared at me from sunken sockets, and that terrible mouth, filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth, stretched in a grotesque parody of a smile. "Kenneth," it said, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to slither into my mind. "How nice of you to come back. We have so much to discuss." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing the dagger. The creature laughed, a sound like bones grinding together. "Oh, Kenneth," it said, taking a step into the room. "Don't you understand? You can't hurt me. I am beyond such mortal concerns." As it spoke, its form seemed to shimmer and change. Suddenly I was looking not at a monster, but at a perfect replica of my wife, Jana. "Kenneth, honey," it said in Jana's voice, "what's wrong? Don't you recognize me?" I felt my resolve waver for a moment. It looked exactly like Jana, down to the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. But then I remembered Margaret's warning. The creature would try to trick me, to confuse me. "You're not real," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not her." The thing wearing Jana's face smiled, and even that familiar expression was twisted into something cruel and wrong. "Very good," it said, its voice shifting back to that terrible rasp. "You're smarter than most. This will be fun." It lunged at me then, moving with impossible speed. I barely had time to dodge, feeling the rush of air as its claws swept past my face. I ran, clutching the ritual items to my chest, heading for the stairs to the basement. I could hear it behind me, its laughter echoing off the walls as it gave chase. I took the stairs two at a time, nearly falling in my haste. The basement was pitch black, my flashlight beam barely cutting through the gloom. I found the spot Margaret had described, a circular area in the center of the room surrounded by strange symbols carved into the floor. As I began to set up for the ritual, laying out candles and herbs, I could hear the creature descending the stairs. "Do you really think your little ritual will stop me?" it called out, its voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. "I am ancient, boy. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have feasted on the fears of countless souls. What makes you think you can stand against me?" I tried to block out its words, focusing on the ritual. I lit the candles, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the match. I began to recite the words Margaret had taught me, my voice growing stronger with each syllable. The air in the basement began to change, growing thick and heavy. The candle flames flickered and danced, casting wild shadows on the walls. And then, as I reached the climax of the incantation, holding the dagger high, everything went still. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the lodge, the creature attacked. It hit me like a freight train, knocking me to the ground. I felt its claws raking across my back, tearing through my shirt and into my flesh. I screamed in pain, but managed to hold on to the dagger. We grappled on the floor, the creature's strength seeming superhuman. Its hot, fetid breath washed over me as its jaws snapped inches from my face. I could see my death in those hollow eyes, the promise of an eternity of suffering. But in that moment, facing my own mortality, I found a well of strength I didn't know I possessed. With a yell that came from the very core of my being, I drove the dagger up and into the creature's chest. It let out a shriek that threatened to burst my eardrums, reeling backward. Black, ichorous blood oozed from the wound, hissing where it touched the ground. The creature looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in its eyes. "No," it growled. "No, this cannot be." I staggered to my feet, the dagger still clutched in my hand. "It's over," I said. "Your time here is done." I began the final words of the ritual, each syllable seeming to vibrate with power. The air around us began to swirl, a vortex of energy centered on the ritual circle. The creature howled, a sound of fury and despair that shook me to my very soul. As the last word left my lips, there was a flash of blinding light. I felt a sensation of falling, of being torn apart and put back together. The creature's screams faded, replaced by a rushing sound like a great wind. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a gray, featureless plain that stretched as far as I could see in every direction. The air was still, and there was no sun in the sky, just a diffuse light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond mere thought, that I had succeeded. The gateway was closed, the creature was banished, and I had paid the price. As I stood there, coming to terms with my new reality, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Margaret, or at least a version of her, standing there. "You did it, Kenneth," she said, her voice filled with pride and sorrow. "You saved them all." I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. "What happens now?" I asked. Margaret smiled, a sad, gentle expression. "Now, my brave friend, you rest. Your journey is over." As she spoke, I felt a great weariness come over me. The pain from my wounds faded, replaced by a sense of peace I had never known before. I closed my eyes, ready to embrace whatever came next. And so ended my encounter with the dark secret of Blevins Lodge. I had faced unimaginable horrors, stared into the face of an ancient evil, and emerged victorious. Though the cost was high, I knew that I had done the right thing. The creature would never harm anyone again. As I drifted into whatever awaited me beyond this gray plain, my last thoughts were of Jana and Tyler. I hoped they would understand, that they would know I had done this for them, for everyone. And I hoped that someday, somehow, I would see them again. But that, as they say, is another story. 65 years have passed since that fateful night at Blevins Lodge. The world has changed in ways I could never have imagined, yet some things remain constant. The sun still rises each morning, painting the Sedona sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The red rocks still stand sentinel over the desert, silent witnesses to the passage of time. And in a small, unremarkable house on the outskirts of town, an old woman sits in her rocking chair, gazing out at the horizon with eyes that have seen too much. Her name is Tyler White, and she is the daughter I left behind all those years ago. She's an old woman now, her hair gray, her face lined with the stories of a life well lived. But in her eyes I can still see the spark of the little girl I once knew. I watch her from the shadows, a spectral observer in a world I no longer belong to. This is my penance, my reward, my eternal duty, to watch over my family, to ensure that the horrors I faced never touch them. Tyler doesn't know I'm here, of course, To her, I'm just a faded memory, a father who disappeared without a trace when she was young. But I've been with her every step of the way, a silent guardian through the triumphs and tragedies of her life. I was there on her wedding day, smiling through tears I couldn't shed as she walked down the aisle. I was there when she held her first child, marveling at the miracle of new life. And I was there during the dark times, the moments of doubt and fear and loss, wishing more than anything that I could reach out and comfort her. But my sacrifice ensured that Tyler and countless others would never have to face the terror that lurked in Blevins Lodge. The creature is gone, banished to a realm beyond human understanding. The gateway is closed, the dark power that once pulsed beneath the Arizona soil, now nothing more than a fading memory. Yet even now, all these years later, I sometimes wonder if it was worth it. In my darkest moments, I question whether the price I paid was too high. But then I look at Tyler, at the life she's lived and the family she's raised, and I know that I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I see Tyler rise from her chair. She moves slowly, her joints stiff with age, but there's still a grace to her movements that reminds me so much of her mother. She pauses at the window, her gaze sweeping across the desert landscape. For a moment, her eyes seem to focus on the spot where I stand, and I feel a jolt of recognition. Can she sense me after all these years? But then the moment passes and she turns away. As she does, I notice something clutched in her hand, a book. My curiosity piqued. I move closer, peering over her shoulder as she settles back into her chair and opens it. It's a journal, the pages yellowed with age. With a start, I realize it's my own handwriting filling those pages. It's the account I wrote of my experience at Blevins Lodge, the story you've just read. I watch as Tyler begins to read, her expression changing from curiosity to disbelief to horror as she delves deeper into the tale. I had always wondered what had happened to that journal. Now I know, somehow it found its way to my daughter. As she reads, I see tears begin to form in her eyes. She pauses, running her fingers over a particular passage. "Oh, Dad," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "Is this why you disappeared? Were you protecting us all along?" I long to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that yes, everything I did was for her mother, for everyone. But I can only watch in silence as she continues to read, absorbing the truth of what happened all those years ago. As she nears the end of the journal, Tyler's expression changes. The sorrow is still there, but there's something else too, understanding, acceptance, and a fierce pride that makes my non-existent heart swell. She closes the book and hugs it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Dad," she says to the empty room. "Thank you for your sacrifice. I love you, and I forgive you for leaving us. I understand now." In that moment, I feel a warmth spreading through me, a sense of peace I haven't known since that fateful night at Blevins Lodge. My daughter knows the truth. She understands, and somehow, across the vast gulf that separates us, I feel connected to her in a way I never have before. As the last light of day fades, I see Tyler rise from her chair once more. She walks to a small table in the corner of the room and picks up a framed photograph. It's a picture of our family, Jana, Tyler, and me, taken just days before my fateful trip to Sedona. Tyler looks at the photo for a long moment, then places it carefully back on the table. But this time, instead of turning away, she speaks directly to it, to me. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she says, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. "You're a hero, and I want you to know that your sacrifice wasn't in vain. We're safe, we're happy, and we've never forgotten you." As she speaks these words, I feel something shift in the air around me. The gray, featureless plain that has been my home for so long begins to fade, replaced by a warm golden light. I feel a gentle tugging, as if something is calling me home. I take one last look at Tyler, memorizing every line of her face, every silver strand of her hair. "I love you," I whisper, knowing she can't hear me, but needing to say it all the same. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." And then, with a sense of joy and peace I haven't felt in decades, I let go. The golden light envelops me, warm and comforting. I feel myself dissolving, becoming one with the light, moving on to whatever comes next. As I fade away, I catch one last glimpse of Tyler. She's smiling, looking out the window at the star-filled sky, and just before everything goes white, I swear I see her mouth the words, "Goodbye, Dad. Thank you." And so, my story truly ends. The dark secret of Blevins Lodge remains just that, a secret, known only to those who lived it and those they chose to tell. The evil that once lurked in the shadows of Sedona is gone, banished by sacrifice and love. As for me, Kenneth White, I move on to whatever awaits beyond this life, content in the knowledge that my family is safe, that my sacrifice meant something. The horror is over, the long watch is done, and at last, finally, I can rest,